Well, good morning. Welcome. Hello, bonjour. Thank you to all of our audience members for joining us today for a presentation, A Future of Hope for Feminist Movements, Reflections After the Green Wave in Argentina, with our special guest, Giselle Carino. Welcome, bienvenue, bienvenidas, bem-vindas. The Center for International Policy Studies is very happy to join the celebrations of the 110th International Women's Day to mark March 8th by celebrating and discussing a historic abortion law reform in Argentina. This reform also marks another important milestone. It changes abortion laws dating back to 1921, so 100 years ago. In the past 25 years, there has been an overwhelming global trend toward the liberalization of abortion laws, with over 50 countries liberalizing their laws. Despite this trend, we also see a significant retrenchment of women's access to abortion, such as is the case of Poland and Honduras. Some 40% of women, or of world's women of reproductive age still live under restrictive laws, and 27 countries actually ban abortion in all cases. More than 35 million women around the world have abortions in unsafe conditions each year, and some 68,000 die from unsafe abortions annually. The global trend toward liberalization has continued over the past decade. However, abortion remains a highly controversial issue, as we know. Still a staple in so many debates and election campaigns in many countries, it carries deep significance for women's reproductive health and human rights. The new law makes Argentina the largest country in Latin America to legalize abortion care. What will this mean for the rest of the region? Our invited speaker will be discussing this and many other questions today. Moderating the event will be Professor Alexandra Getchou, professor at the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs here at the University of Ottawa, and Associate Director of CIPS. Her research interests are in the fields of international security, international institutions, the new right in Europe, and is currently part of a research project entitled The Global Right, focusing on radical conservatism and international order. I would now like to welcome Professor Getchou.
Thank you so much, Anna, and good morning, everyone. On behalf of CIPS, it is my great pleasure and privilege to introduce our speaker and to welcome all of you to a webinar that focuses on a set of issues that, as Anna has pointed out, has long had a profound impact on the lives of women around the world. Our speaker today, as you have already heard, is Giselle Carino, the CEO for the International Planned Parenthood Federation, Western Hemisphere region, which is a progressive feminist ecosystem of more than 20 local partner organizations, largely from the global south, who share a common mission to ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive healthcare, eliminate violence against women, girls, and gender diverse people, provide sex education, and fight for sexual and reproductive justice. Giselle is a political scientist and a prominent activist from Argentina. She's a high-impact leader whose mission to mobilize change in gender equality across the global south is evidenced in her long-standing commitment to forging connections, amplifying voices, and establishing systems to more effectively meet the complex, intersecting needs of women and girls of all ages, sectors, and political affiliations in Latin America and the Caribbean. Under her leadership, the International Planned Parenthood Federation has played a key role in supporting critical policy reforms across Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as at the UN. And this, to mention just a few of her very impressive achievements. And to learn more about her profile and her fantastic work, I would warmly invite you to visit the webinar description on the CIPS website. Today, Giselle has kindly agreed to not only give a presentation about her work, but also to answer your questions. And so we'll reserve some time for the Q&A session. And I am absolutely delighted to say that her colleague, Professor Deborah Dinis, will join her for that part of the webinar. Deborah is an international leader in the field of reproductive justice and gender equality. So we are very fortunate and deeply grateful for the opportunity to hear from both of them today. Without further ado, once again, a very warm welcome and our deep thanks to Giselle and Deborah for making time for us today. And Giselle, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being at CIPS today on this very special day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. Indeed, a very special day. I am very moved and I'm very happy to be sharing this moment with you. Both is a day in which we recognize, the struggles and the fights for justice of those who preceded us, those who raised us, propped us, and made today possible. And we also look at the fights we still have to fight, right? So for me, it's a very good opportunity to share with you this historic moment that for us, Argentinian women are experiencing today. It's our first year where we celebrate March 8 with a law that allows for safe and legal abortion. So that's definitely moving. And yet, for those of you who are following the news in the region, I was very moved yesterday as, the president of Mexico. We are all expecting progressive views. That hasn't happened around feminism. Mexico is a country in which about 11 women every day are killed. And women last week have been working and mobilizing our feminist colleagues, politicians, parliamentarians, artists very strongly for against a candidate that the president was pushing, who has a number of allegations of violence. And he went through, he nominated, went through the process. And it was very interesting as I was reading this morning, he barricaded the main plaza in Mexico City, the main buildings, the Congress, the church, with huge metals walls. What is the irony of a president who experienced a metal wall on one side of the border that barricades buildings with a metal wall against women, because he was expecting women today were not going to take it, were going to be in the street, in the plaza. And I was very pleased to see our colleagues and friends, they wrote on the metal walls the name of every and each of the women who have been killed, as a reminder that our fight continues, and we will be there, and we will resist, and we'll fight, and we will win. So I just wanted to open and share that with you. So talking about Argentina, we, IPPFWHR, the organization we lead, have been working in Argentina for the past 15 years. We traditionally would work with one organization per country. We changed our model as, there is an ecosystem, a group of organizations trying to advance on abortion rights. When we began working there, the groups, the movement has really made a number of attempts for the law to be discussed in Congress. After 13 attempts, the law was finally discussed in 2018. The debate was opened by President Macri, and we were all very happy, and we lost in the Senate for a few votes. And then the law was discussed again this December, and on December 30, it passed with a much bigger majority, with support from all political parties, which is rather unusual. I don't know how it is for you in Canada, but certainly in Argentina, to be able to pull together a law on abortion, to make it pass with very little modifications through the process in the middle of a pandemic. It's a very remarkable achievement, and I just wanted to share with you how our analysis of how this happened. Progress is rarely linear, and this has been the case in Argentina. As I said, we had an Argentinian Pope. It's a very Catholic country with a strong tradition, and after the 2018 defeat in the Senate, I remember I had the opportunity to go and speak there. And the decision happened, I don't know why, but it always happens that way, at 3 a.m. in the morning. It was winter for us, so it was raining, and women have mobilized tremendously around the bill. So we were all there disappointed. And I remember looking around and looking at the very, very young people who didn't look disappointed. They had a sense of, that we had won in the streets, that the law, that parliamentarians would eventually come around, and that it was just a matter of finding another opportunity, but that the social pressure, the social mobilization, the social base of support for the law was gigantic. And they were right, not only as per the result, but I remember, I come from a very small town in rural Argentina, and I remember that before 2018, everyone was wearing everywhere, in the subway, in schools, in plazas, the green handkerchief around, our backpacks or our bags or our wrist or whatever you wanted to wear. So you could see a wave of green. After 2018, I remember, proms in my town where, girls began wearing green as a symbol of the fight. Our equivalent to the Oscars, actresses who became very, very, very engaged in the safe abortion debate in the country began wearing green shoes, green dresses, and all of a sudden green was not only the color of hope, it was the color of a fight that was worth fighting. And I just wanted to share that because I was trying, for those of you who saw the pictures and follow the debate, you could see a wave of green touching almost every province of the country. And we are very proud of having been part of that. IPPFWHR has been supporting about 10 organizations through the process, and we continue to do so now in the implementation phase, which, as you know, it's critically important. After the law changes, that has been our experience in almost every country we accompanied, and not just on abortion. The big challenge begin of actually putting the law to work and making sure that women access services. So that Argentina is not going to be the exception. I wanted to talk briefly about the three elements that we think had made a difference in the case of Argentina. One is the organic and free forms of organization for civil society. The second, the participation of young people in the Green Wave. And the three, perhaps the alignment between different progressive movements, which we think are absolutely critical. And this has been a challenge for us as well, as we were trying to support and intervene. There is the idea, that movements in the feminist movement needs to be organized as a political party, with a centralized, clear lines of leadership. This has not been the case in the movement in Argentina. The National Campaign for Safe and Legal Abortion has been a very big and important platform, and certainly groups and organizations gravitated towards the leadership of the campaign. But there wasn't one single centralized leadership. This allowed for the creation of intergenerational alliances between women who have spent decades fighting first for democracy, then for the right to divorce, then for we pass laws on gender identity and equal marriage, with those newcomers, with younger folks who maybe this was their first fight on social justice issues. So when you look from the outside, you would see something very chaotic, even for Argentinian standards. But this was organized chaos, I would say, and really was responsible for opening the agenda and the political action across generations. And I would want to say that the movement that took the streets all over the country is a very much an intersectional movement and very diverse, from rural women to trans women, to artists, to academics. So very, very, very open in that sense. And all the credit here goes to those feminists who put generosity, as they call it, at the center of their political organization and the political organizing. I do want to touch base on the issue of youth. I think the participation of young people has been a fundamental element. Young girls began to debate the issue of sexual and reproductive health and rights, sex ed, the right to abortion, in the streets, in the school, at the dinner table. These young people are not necessarily linked to any particular organization. We did connect it. We are an organization who has a strong focus on youth. Youth are part of our governing bodies. Youth are part of our programming. And we did connect to some of them. We connected some of this movement to the international community. But we understood that our role was to support, we ended up supporting like 20 small grassroots organizations to fuel the movement and to ensure that these young voices could be heard. And they were very active, they were in the marches, they were everywhere. I think like with any good fight that we are seeing currently in the world, against gun control or for gun control in the US, for climate justice is led by young people. And I do want to say that this fight has been led by young women. This was central because as we left with the defeat in 2018, these young women voted the following year for the very first time. And what we began to see is that no political candidate in that presidential campaign, we had a presidential campaign, was spared and needed to take a position and needed to take a position on the issue of abortion. And we had never seen that before. That propelled, we always had women in politics, that's not new to us. However, that propelled a new group of feminist women that not only ran for politics for the first time in their lives in many cases, but won seats in the Congress. And we won the law with a much larger margin that we were expecting. And I credit that to the feminist women that actually, from all political parties, that didn't stop pushing for it. And a third element I want to say, for those of you who are not familiar, in 2015, we had a huge mobilization and the organic creation of a movement called Ni Una Menos, not one less. The movement is for the fight against all type of violence. It responded rather spontaneously to a number of very high-profile femicides that have taken place in the country. And I think what we saw happening is the mobilizations which tend to happen in June or used to happen in June about the Ni Una Menos movement confluenced with the fight for safe and legal abortion. And women took the streets everywhere in the country, to the social networks, and they saw that deep, Argentinians, we have the tradition of taking the street as an affirmation of our citizenship, right? To be there with our body is affirming that we are citizens and we are demanding for change. And this confluence, I think, made very clear that deep inside in the progressive agenda, there is a very strong connection between these two and the recognition of equality, of equal citizenship is absolutely central to both and needed to come together. And I think they did that beautifully, right? All these elements we consider to be an inspiration for the rest of Latin America and the Caribbean, for the rest of the world. And we push back a little bit about this notion, when oftentimes I feel here, I'm living in the US, and I feel here that sometimes, when people ask, will Argentina be a model for X country? I think there is a sense that, Latin America and the Caribbean is one block. And as you know, we have very unique histories, perspectives, processes have their own life, and factors influencing them in each of the countries. So we see, that this idea of comparative advocacy is useful to some extent, but not precisely in the way in which it has necessarily been used, right? That we need to support fuel the local movements, who are the ones who know what works for them and how to take this forward. And that's what we are doing in Latin America. So I just will spend a few minutes talking about Latin America and what we see. We have also rejected the idea that what happened in Honduras is a backlash to what happened in Argentina. You know, for those of us who are born and raised, the backlash is what we have, the status quo is what we have lived with our entire lives, no? I remember very clearly when Zika was affecting Latin America and the Caribbean, countries, parliamentarians in countries like El Salvador and Honduras decided that perhaps it was a good opportunity to push for a law that would further criminalize abortion in those countries, extending prison sentences from 30 to 50 years. So we believe the green way is fighting against patriarchy and fighting against the status quo. And the rest is what we have raised and lived with all our lives, no? We see great opportunities in Latin America and the Caribbean coming from the recent developments. We believe Colombia has a movement called the Just Cause, Causa Justa. It's a movement of about 100 organizations. They have put in front of the courts the possibility of taking abortion out of the penal code, following your experience in Canada, to which we look up to, and hopefully will be discussed soon. We hope in October of this year. That's a great opportunity. We see Chile began discussing the opening of the law in which we worked a few years ago as well. After what happened in Argentina, I think in January of this year. Chile is also undergoing very significant process. As you know, there will be drawing a new constitution, this time under democracy for the very first time. And the constitution begins with parity, which we believe is already part of this wave that has been touching Latin America and the Caribbean. We have a case in front of the Supreme Court in Brazil. So there is a lot of movement in the region, and a lot of hope and potential to be harnessed if we are willing to support the feminist movement at this moment in time of great potential. There are also difficulties. We have Dominican Republic has been discussing for many years now a law, it's backs and forth, comes and back. Mexico, who, as you know, abortion is legal in Mexico City, and the different states are reacting differently. We had last week a defeat in Quintana Roo, but the fight continues. We know that the change in the law in Oaxaca was a direct result from the energy, and it was fantastic to go to Mexico and see all the feminists occupying the Congress in green with green handkerchiefs as well. It was a great success in Oaxaca. We are very happy that happened. And we will continue fighting. The sense that we have is that the green wave has created a one-way street, and it's forward, it's for progress, and that our role is, of course, to support that and nurture and support the movement. Finally, I do want you to know that we are working heavily in the implementation in Argentina, like with any law, more so in Argentina. We have great laws on paper. We want this law to be a reality. We know women will not back down until that happens. And so we are working with the Ministry of Health to ensure that that the drugs are available, that we have like other countries have people who refuse to provide care. We hope that today the Ministry of Health, the presidency will issue the regulations for the law, which we still don't have. We hope it's today, it will be the great date. They say it's almost ready, but we hasn't been available. We are working in several digital platforms to ensure that women know where services are available, where women can do social accountability, where they can tell, you know, how well they have been received, whether they have been offered the services, what was their experience. We are working heavily on that. And a few words that I think are important, a few pearls of the law that we think are important. It's basically the law, you know, the law is up to 14 weeks, introduces interesting feminist takes that we haven't seen in other laws. It uses non-cis language. It refers to women and people with other gender identities and the ability to procreate, which we think is cutting edge. It says that access to legal abortion is a human right under the conventions ratified by Argentina. Talks about the law requests written consents, but patients over 16 years old are treated as adult, and between 13 and 16-year-olds can decide for themselves regarding interventions that are not invasive. It's a very interesting, the discussion about invasive and not invasive. It holds great potential for a further expansion of abortion with pills, which has been used and supported by women-to-women networks, as well as health professionals. In Argentina, we have a long tradition of that, even in the prior and very limited restrictions. So we think that holds great potential. And it gives a time in which the service needs to be provided, and make some provisions in terms of refusal of care or conscientious objection, establishing that institutions cannot object, and given some parameters on how can this happen. So I will conclude here. I am happy to answer any question. I wanted to leave you with the sense that in Latin America and the Caribbean, there is at the moment great potential to see a region becoming greener, and that we are not going to stop until that happens. So the fight continues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Giselle. This is absolutely fascinating, and thanks for all the amazing work that you and your colleagues are doing. We'll open it up for the Q&A session. I will invite you to please type your questions in the Q&A box. Please keep them as brief as you can, because we would like to get to as many people as possible. And perhaps as I invite the others to collect their thoughts, if I may, Giselle, just get us started, a couple of questions. And the first one would be, if you want to reflect on the impact of the pandemic on your work and also on the situation of the women that you're working with. And just to get a bit of context, in my own research in Central and Eastern Europe, I know that in the context of the pandemic, the situation has become quite difficult. In a number of countries, even where progressive laws are in place, the authorities have invoked the exception of the pandemic to essentially make it more difficult for women to have access to safe abortion. I'm wondering if that is limited to Central and Eastern Europe, or whether this is a kind of problem that you've also encountered in Latin America, and whether you see a way out, if there's any source of hope for you there. The other one, the second question would be if you would reflect on the challenges involved in implementing legislation, because it's a crucial point that you mentioned. We may have progressive legislation, and this of course is a huge step forward, but the fight does not end there, because sometimes there can be quite significant obstacles in terms of implementing. I'm wondering if you would like to reflect on some of those obstacles that you have encountered and ways in which your movement can make a difference. And then finally, and I think that I speak for everyone, if there are people in the audience who would like to support your movement, your cause, are there any ways in which we could help you? So thank you so much. I'll get you perhaps started on those, and again, invite the audience to please type your questions in the Q&A box. Thank you so much, Giselle.
Thank you. So the impact of the pandemic, I was just reading a report from the United Nations Population Fund on the pandemic and the effect on SRHR on women. It's chilling to go through it. They basically show how the pandemic has regressed women's access to basic, essential, safe healthcare in Latin America and the Caribbean about 40 years. 40 years, that's my age. So what we encounter ahead of us in what we can think of a post-pandemic world, if one can think of that, is a much more difficult task ahead of us. Particularly when most of our countries, we have made great strides in accessing, beginning to close the gap on, unmet need for contraception, and I think the fact that that's at risk because of the pandemic, because of how the lockdown measures have been implemented. A year ago we had in the Americas 30 countries on lockdown, all of our services shut down. These measures we had to seek protective measures to be able to provide care. In some countries we provide maternity care. In all of the countries we provide sexual and reproductive health care to keep clinics open. We had most of our community programs closed, and since then the progress has been a bit non-linear, I would say. We open and close, but what we can see and tell you is that the creative resilience of our partners to provide care, no matter what, no matter how. We have had organizations who began delivering contraceptives by, just like you deliver food, by bike, by motorcycle. We began, expanding the work done through women-to-women care, through networks, and I think we have seen great work happening on the ground. Although the situation is and will be very difficult in the years to come. When you read the report from the Commission on Economic Development, you see that the progress on women's in the workforce has been regressed 10 years. Women have been the center of care, care in the front lines, as the great majority of healthcare providers are women, including ours. Care in the home, without schools. Most of the countries have been without school, even not with remote instruction, unless you have money to pay for private school, which is not the case in where we work. So the situation for women, it's very difficult. On abortion specifically, I want to say that we have had great access, important access, I would say, to medicines, to pills for abortion. That's very important. We think the pandemic could accelerate, has been accelerating some important innovations in telemedicine, for instance, that appear to be completely out of reach. And that is always a combination of that along with women supporting women, right? Which in Argentina we have a long tradition, and in other countries as well, through hotlines, and this doesn't exclude the work with the health sector, but it's an important element in the context of the pandemic and in the context of making sure the law can be implemented. Implementing legislation on abortion is always challenging, more so in a federal country. We are a federal country. We have a very strong opposition from the Catholic Church, from the evangelical churches, and we also have great leaders from these churches who we work with to support the implementation of the law across the country. We had the first week after the law was passed, one of the provinces, which I call the Republic of Chaco, because they think they are a republic. They decided that they were not going to follow the law, that they will not going to provide services to women in that province. Not surprisingly, that province is one of the highest in maternal mortality. I think there will be fights, not just on the actual implementation of the service, but on the legal end of things. And so we are supporting a group of feminist lawyers who have been very close to women and working in these provinces, tend to be in the north of the country, to support the Ministry of Health in the different provinces to make sure that women can access the services. And we will continue to do that for the years to come, because we know it's a process, right? And if you want to support our work, we would love it. You can support us through IPPFWHR.org. And we would be very happy if you follow us on Instagram. We have a campaign called Women in Times. The campaign brings every day stories of women, of actual women, real women that are connected to us. It's in English, in Spanish, and in Portuguese at the moment. And I love if you can follow us and support us there as well, amplifying some of these stories of the women who are at the front line doing the very important work we support. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And we have a question from Rita Borbia, who invites you to comment on the state of abortion providers in Argentina. And the questions are, will there be training in medical schools going forward? Will the emphasis be on compassionate care? If you would like to answer that.
Yes, we have a public health system like you do in Canada. With Argentina is a poor country. We like to believe, and our buildings testify for a past in which we apparently had money and were developed. That's not the case. The country is struggling. The public health sector is struggling, not just for abortion care in general, for health care. There are a number of networks of providers who are very, very active, have been supporting, their voices have been central in the abortion debate. In 2018 and again now, they have told parliamentarians and the public at large how hard it was for them to want to support women and not being able to because the law was a restriction, what it meant to them, and how important and how in support we were of the change. These providers are very active across the country. There are 2 or 3 networks. But it's almost ants work, I have not seen yet, it's surprising, but I haven't seen in many countries in Latin America, abortion being fully part of the medical training. Sometimes appears as a, add-on if you have interest and you're lucky. And so that hasn't been yet central, which means that the work is left to, to organizations and those who can support training and mobilization of providers around this issue, which has also been central to us. We do support providers that work in the public sector, as well as those who, through NGOs and organizations that do provide care to women, including to migrant women, which we don't know because we haven't seen fully as I said, the regulation has not been issued, but it is a concern to us how if migrant women, not just that are living in Argentina, but those who are in transit or coming to Argentina to seek an abortion, whether they will be able to. And it's something that we have been supporting across the region with an organization that, several organizations, but one in particular who bring women from Brazil and other countries, support women to come to receive care. So it's not a very promising picture at the moment. Academic institutions tend to be, hard to change. It takes years. So we can't count on it right now for to catalyze the quick change that we need to have happen here.
The next question comes from Megan Graveline. Now that Argentina passed this historic to legalize abortion, what do you believe is the next big priority that Argentina should focus on to advance women's rights in the country? And of course, this question is specifically about Argentina, and that's extremely important. But let me just say that if you would like to comment also on priorities for other Latin American countries, maybe if Deborah wants to add something as well, this will be a perfect opportunity. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'll talk briefly about Argentina, and I'm going to pass the floor to Deborah to talk about Brazil and other countries as well. For us in Argentina, we have had, as I said, the law passed, there are many laws that passed and nothing happened, so our focus will be heavily on implementation of this law. But in policy reform, there is a group of organizations and women working heavily on 2 things. One, related to the care work for women specifically, and how best we issue social protections in that regard the work around the care economy is peaking. There is a lot of development in the country, and we very much see these issues highly connected, right? As it has to do, as I said, from our equal footing and equality in a society, in a democratic society. And I think the second one that we are definitely going to continue supporting is the fight against violence. We are a region where we have laws on violence, but the numbers are awful. The number in the context of the pandemic, we know that the home is not a safe place. We always knew the home is not a safe place for women, but as people were confined in their homes, sometimes with very strict lockdowns, we know from the reports from the hotline that the numbers have increased significantly. We see the number of femicides taking place everywhere in the region is awful. It's something needs to be addressed, and of course it's multifactorial, multidimensional. It's not something you just fix with the law, but we need bigger efforts about that. Deborah, would you want to add about the rest, Latin America, Brazil?
I think I'm not allowed to put my video on. Hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes, we can.
So let me. Yes. No. Yes. No. Thank you, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be with you all. And Giselle is the star today, not just because she comes from Argentina, and it's a moment of celebration that we have with the Green Wave, and being a Brazilian at this moment in time, I have the feeling that I have a pessimistic tone, right? Being in a country that is the day after of Trump, but I would my perspective would be to highlight what do we need, how do we need to think about those countries like Brazil, Venezuela, or El Salvador that are now under very strong political establishment that is authoritarian, that is against women and threatening women and gender diverse people. How can we frame, how can we understand, how can we raise the question, what is happening there? And what is the hope, the feminist hope about those countries? I would say that one of our challenges is to understand that it's not by chance that those authoritarian governments do persecute women and gender diverse people. It's at the core of what they want to do and what they impose to do, to have a anti-gender agenda. And sometimes looking from outside, we try to understand what is happening in a Catholic evangelical country like Brazil or Argentina as a battle about religion, but it's not about religion per se. And if we look to Argentina, we have the Pope that comes from Argentina, and something happened. So it's more than religion. Religion is just a way of speaking about something that is at the core of those societies. And again, for me, it's patriarchy and authoritarian patriarchy political past. But if I have a hope, being a feminist activist at this moment outside Brazil and living in nowhere because of political persecution, do my work on the decriminalization of abortion, my hope is that we need a strong civil society feminist movement, because no matter what will happen in those countries, and it's Venezuela, it's El Salvador, it's Brazil, when the political climate change, is the feminist movement that will be there to keep the agenda alive. So in the next 2 days, on March 10th and 11th, we'll have the first days of an important hearing for Americas at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and in which case from El Salvador, and from a concrete woman, and her name is Manuela, will start the process of, the court taking a decision. And Manuela is a woman who had a obstetric emergency that was classified by the criminal law as an abortion. She was put in jail, and the sentence goes from 30 to 50 years in El Salvador. And she died from cancer at the jail. And feminist groups, can you imagine what it is to be a feminist in El Salvador at this moment? They managed to tell the story. They managed to go to the courts. And now they managed to be at the Inter-American Court to say something is wrong here. And if that case goes well, it will be the first case for our region saying that the criminalization of abortion has impact on women's human rights, and abortion should be considered a need, and we need to offer a reparation to Manuela's family. What I'm saying with that story is that even in countries with very strict legislation, or with the day after Trump, like Brazil, we can have some hope by dramatic stories, or by the persistence of feminist movement on the ground.
Thank you so much. It's really encouraging to hear you talk about that. Moving on to the next question, also from Megan. When I was in Argentina, what surprised me is how women are being honored in the public sphere. Do you think it's a bit ironic or paradoxical, or what does it say about Argentinian society? Giselle, I think that's specifically for you.
And I saw the question. I was thinking, we all grew up. We can blame Mafalda for how we turned out to be, right? Mafalda was this little girl, a cartoonist, who was trying to do art and humor in the middle of the dictatorship. Began drawing Mafalda, who was a girl who was challenging the world, and in her way, patriarchy and the role of women, and in our upbringing, as we all read as kids, and learned from her organizing skills and her challenging of, how she read and analyzed what was happening in the world, what happened with democracy. And he passed now, but he was a central figure of in support of the abortion law reform. He said several times Mafalda would have been in favor of this, and so he wanted to make sure before passing that we knew that she had a position taken, and this was her position. And I think, like with any other country, Argentina is full of contradictions, right? So in our recognition of women, in our recognition of public figures, we tend to choose those who more closely match the patriarchal values, and we challenge that, and we recognize that as well. You see in the streets, in many of the newest neighborhoods, it's very interesting because the names of the streets are all women fighters for different causes. So I think we have evolved as a society, and I would like to stay with the thought that Mafalda was to blame for that deep sense of fighting against forms of oppression that is central to I think to our exercise of citizenship as Argentinians, even though in a country with many complications and many faults and difficulties at the moment.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We don't have any other questions, the Q&A session. We have a few minutes. I'm wondering if I could take this opportunity to ask you and both of you really if there are any significant international dimensions to your work, to your campaigns, because you have spoken about a very important work that's being carried out in Latin America. And that, again, it's very important, it's fantastic. I'm wondering if you've had support from, let's say, feminist movements from other regions, whether you work with them, whether you connect, whether you try to support each other, or if not, is that something that you would like to see happen in the coming years? And again, it's a question to both of you if you wish to address it. Thank you.
Yes, I can begin with that. And there is a question also about Miles for Women, which is women traveling across the region that we are supporting. So I'm going to ask Deborah to talk about that. It's a very interesting piece of work out of also our solidarity to see, as we recognize abortion is a human right, central part of women's rights, and we are humans. We wanted to build and support organizations who also support women as they leave, as they want to leave the country to access services somewhere else if they can't receive them there. Yes, we work, in addition to working in Latin America and the Caribbean, we had worked now for 10 years in Uganda and Tanzania, supporting abortion law reform efforts and practices in a consortium of organizations. We believe in global solidarity. We understand that the challenges are global and that we have much to learn and hopefully contribute to others. Always come from the perspective of those who are in those countries know best, and so they, we take their lead. That has been our work for more than 10 years. We also are part of spaces. We have UN ECOSOC status since 2002, I think. So we are very present with our experience, with our voice in the UN spaces with great partners like UNFPA and others, and we will continue to take the space to bring the voices of Latin American and Caribbean women's forward in those spaces. I'll give the floor to Deborah. She wants to add and maybe talks about Miles for Women and other initiatives in that regard.
Yeah, you asked before about the solutions during the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic on women. And maybe I can tell you two stories that happened. One is in one of the main challenges for women in a situation of domestic violence was how to tell others what is happening. So how to find a shelter. So it was created an app that the name is Do You Have Sugar? Like a community of neighbors saying, we are just exchanging, sugar or milk or whatever our family needs. And in the app was a hidden button that was, I need shelter. And in that way, what they expect to build is a new way of constructing the community, the sense of community. Because what we have in the pandemic in our lives is that we need to change this idea of assemblies, of taking the streets, of getting together. And those simple solutions are a way that in the community that you live, you can recognize each other and in a moment of despair to say, I need a shelter. So it's one of the examples. And the second one that is about Miles for Women's Life. And this is really a story of hope. As you know, abortion in Brazil is against the law and women can go to jail. There is a Supreme Court case that is still pending, asking for the decriminalization of abortion. But one day, a concrete woman, much more concrete than me, I mean, a working class woman, brown woman, and with 2 kids, she reached out to the organization that I use it to work, and she said, I'm pregnant, but I cannot have another child, and I do not want to be a criminal. I want to go to the courts, and I want to ask to the state to recognize my right. And we told her the chances are really low to get an authorization. And she said, but I'm fine. I do not want to pass the line between the legality and the criminal space. And of course that we did what she wanted, but at the same time, we had a plan B that was to put her in a plane and fly her to in that moment was Colombia. Nowadays, we expect that would be Argentina. That is much easier. And she was here in an organization that Giselle was mentioning in the ecosystem in the region. And she went back to Brazil and she became a feminist advocate, and she created the organization that is basically asking people to donate miles for women so they can fly to have access to safe and legal abortion and not putting their lives in risk. So these are very, sometimes my point about feminists is that what is in front of us is that women know what they need. And our role as supporters is to ask them, what do you need? And they do have the creative solutions, and what they need is just that we stay by their side, making and amplifying that, connecting their ideas with platforms that can support what they know how to do and how to do.
Thank you so much. And interestingly, Deborah, you actually answered even the final question that came up as you were speaking, which is, can you please say more about women traveling from region to region for abortion services? It was perfect. Your timing was absolutely impeccable. And I see that the person who asked it, who's a professor at our university, Cristabel Senna, has invited you to contact her. I don't know if you would like to do so, but Anna can certainly facilitate the conversation between you. And on this note, let me thank both of you for an extraordinary presentation. Thank you also for making time, and I will just appear now. I hope that's okay. Thank you for making time to be with us today. We know you are extremely busy, so we truly appreciate the time. We appreciate the fantastic work that you are carrying out for women in Latin America, and really for all of us, because we really are in this together, to repeat an old cliche, but one that is absolutely true in this case. So thank you for that. We are wishing you the very best of luck in this important and it has to be said often dangerous work. And we hope to be able to persuade you to return to CIPS for another visit in the not too distant future. But for now, our very best wishes and deep thanks. Thank you also to Anna for all the hard work for this event. Thank you so much to Michael for the technical support, for making it possible for us to meet virtually, even when we cannot meet in the same room. And thanks to all of you for attending today's event. We are grateful for your presence, and we hope to welcome you back soon for more exciting CIPS events.